Okay, so this video is all about helping give you some guidance to build out a real life argument. So let's get started because we got lots to cover here. The first thing is that even though I'm going to say a lot in this video, it's hard to say anything kind of nice and simple that will be applicable to every map in a nice kind of simple sequence. This is not going to be like listicles. Every real life argument is different, so every map is going to be different. And every kind of iteration and revision is probably going to hit a different part of the map where there aren't going to be any kind of nice simple rules to follow. If you remember being taught how to write an essay, and maybe this is still where you're at, you get the 5 paragraph or the 3 paragraph essay where you have a thesis statement and then you have 3 middle paragraphs with 1 reason, 2 reason, 3 reason. That's an artificial thing. You should have moved beyond that already. If you haven't, this course will help you do that. But just like real world writing doesn't happen in 5 paragraph chunks, right? Real world argumentation doesn't happen in any particular way. It's very flexible, so it's going to be hard to kind of have a one size fits all approach to mapping. And so in our case for this course, whatever argument you've chosen to map is going to need a little bit of direct one-on-one feedback from me as I see you gradually build this out. And so that's why I'm saying here to plan to do resubmissions, to plan to have multiple resubmissions before kind of the map really actually looks like the argument it's trying to represent. So the corollary to that is don't do too much before you hand it in to get some advice and feedback from me. Because if you do spend a lot of time on something, then it's going to be bad for you, because if I find something that I'm not happy with, it's going to maybe invalidate a lot of the work that you did. The one key thing that I can say is whatever argument you pick, it's not going to look like a listicle. I picked listicles because they were dumb and shallow. The argument that you're going to pick is not going to be either of those things, and so the map that it makes is not going to be looking like a listicle, right? Maps can look listicle shaped vaguely, right? That is, they can be broad and have, because they have many independent reasons for the conclusion, or they can be kind of narrow in because they only have kind of one main branch with only one top row reason that leads into maybe some sub reasons and things like that. And they can very definitely be lopsided. There's no requirement for every main reason to have the same number of supporting reasons below it in row 2, and then for each one of those to have the same number of supporting reasons below them in row 3. You can have a branch that has a couple sub branches, and one of the sub branches is kind of stubby, and the other one is keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, right? The only thing that we can say as a rule is that the real life argument you have is definitely not going to be shallow like your listicle. It's going to have a row 2, it's going to have a row 3 sub reasons, or reasons for reasons for reasons, right? The one thing that you want to do while you are building this map is not take all of the text of the argument and plunk it all into boxes all at once, and then like a jigsaw puzzle try and figure out how all those fit together. That's going to be too overwhelming. What you want to do is a little bit of breaking apart an argument, that is extracting some claims and then piecing them together, and then kind of testing, hey, does this look good? Do they work well like this? And then break apart a little bit more, fit them together, and then, hey, do these work? So we're going to be doing a lot of putting claims into boxes and then doing some relatively informal argument evaluation, primarily the R relevance part, as we're trying to figure out where boxes belong and do they belong under one another, things like that. One thing that we are not going to do while we're trying to create the map is spend any time doing formal ARG evaluation. That will be a waste of time. Only do that when I have given you the green light and am overall kind of happy with the map that you've ended up with. And then I'll tell you, okay, now's the time to start evaluation, formal evaluation, and dress up the map with basis boxes, with R notes, answer some G questions. If I don't give you that green light, don't spend any time doing that. In fact, one thing that we are going to do is be even slower, because the critical part of any map is that top row, those main reasons that are directly relevant to the conclusion, right? If we get that correct, if we're happy with how those main reasons look and the thesis statement that they're all directed towards, then that makes it much easier to build down and out and find reasons for those reasons. So the very first thing I'm going to ask you to do is just identify the conclusion and identify the main reasons for them. That's it. Hand that in. Let me take a look at it, give you feedback before you do any more work building down. And the reason why is because often we're looking at a real world argument, and even though we've had practice with the listicles, you're going to slide into, or lots of students are at risk of sliding back into, thinking about the text argument that they're looking at and picking out narrative sequences instead of logical structure. And so lots of times you're going to identify, instead of main reasons, main topics. So what we need to do when we're doing this first step of trying to identify those top row of reasons is to remember that topics are names of things and reasons are claims that come in complete sentences. So if you make sure that those top row reasons are complete sentences, that they're claims, that they say something about the world, and they're not just names of areas of future discussion or something like that, then you're on the right foot. And we're going to have, it'll be more likely I will agree with you that yes, these are the main reasons, and that then I'll give you the green light to build down more. But we really have to get that stuff straight, because if we don't, then any energy and effort you put into row 2 or row 3 claims or anything else like that is, again, waste of time, right? So we need to make sure that we have those main reasons correct and accurate before we start doing any other work, because they're the things that are going to hold the rest of the map together. And for every claim that happens in every box, including the conclusion, we want to make sure that they're all complete brief sentences, right? So I said this a little bit with the listicle, but the listicles were pretty easy. So the argument that you pick, this stuff might actually be tricky in a substantial part of the work that you have to do. You want to make sure that you simplify every one of those claims, take out the flowery language, the literary allusions, the metaphors, things like that, and make sure it's just kind of right there in stark and boring clarity, okay? Take out the fluff, take out unneeded context. Some context we're going to need, right? Some kind of information, but sometimes people will express arguments and they'll put in other information that kind of just helps round it out, but doesn't really function in the argument. We can get rid of that stuff, right? The other thing that we need to do, as some of you might have had practice with the listicle, is there's going to be some things we're going to have to add back in that the writer of that argument left out. In particular, pronouns and other things like that. We're going to have to add those back in to make sure that every single box contains a claim that is independently intelligible. And this is going to be super important for our more complicated maps, because as we build them, it's likely that we're going to start moving reasons and branches around. And so if you have written boxes where what that box says, what that box means, kind of depends on it being below another box where you identified what the it or the they was, and then we rip it off there and we put it somewhere else, now it's going to be much less apparent to you or anybody else what that box means. So we need to make sure that those things stay in every box, even if it is kind of repetitive, right? And just like the listicles, sometimes we can just cut and paste what the author has put in, and hey, they're clear, they're complete, they're independently intelligible, and so we can just cut and paste, but usually there's some rephrasing to be done. The other thing we want to be careful of is making sure that in every box where we have a claim, that the indicator words that we might have talked about before, things that indicate logical structure, have no place inside a claim. Because if there's a because or a so or a therefore or other things that indicate logical structure, what that means is that that box should be split into two or more claims, and that because or so or whatever other logical cue is what we use to connect those boxes together in a particular relationship, right? Also, lots but not all instances of and can also communicate logical relationships, right? So sometimes you'll have a sentence with two claims in it, and they're stuck together with an and that and could mean that those two claims are both reasons for the sentence that came before it. So they belong in separate boxes underneath the claim that came before it in the text. Or they could use and instead of because or so or therefore, and one of those two claims in that sentence belongs above the other one. It's hard to tell, can't say. You got to go off the context of that argument and what feels right, right? The other thing that we want to do is make sure that we're not just putting in information, right? So this is kind of the same thing as we're not talking about topics here, we're talking about claims. Reasons are claims, right? We don't want to just have information in our map. We want to be goal directed here. Hey, is that thing that they said in their text actually part of the argument? What part? Where does it belong? That's what we're looking at, right? We want to find those relationships of evidential support and put them in the right spot in our map. Some tips here on how to kind of narrate that logical exploration of where things belong and to give you some kind of checks to help reassure you that you have arranged boxes in the right order, put a box above another box appropriately, and that you're not putting them upside down, right? Is to ask yourself these kinds of questions, right? So you have a map that you've been working on and you have one box above another box, right? Ask yourself this question: if I or the reader wasn't convinced of the top box, right, what would I say to reassure the reader, hey, no, don't worry about this box, it's true, it's acceptable? The answer to that would go in a box below it, right? A shorter way to say that is just to be a little bit skeptical, right? Hey, here's a claim. Why should I believe that claim? And if you can find the answer to that question in the text, then you can lift that out, plunk it in its own box, and put it underneath the box that you were asking this question of, right? Eventually, as we build depth, build down, get support for support for support, we should, for most real-life arguments, hit at least one branch in our map that gets at least 3 rows deep. If not more than one branch, we'll get 3 rows deep. Okay, so I talked a little bit about how to do logical structure, right? How to think about it, right? This is another kind of way to check. This is an informal relevance check, right? That connection between boxes above and boxes below is based on the evidential support the below box gives to the box above it, that we often shorthand with the word because, right? But be careful, because sometimes we say because for other reasons, not to indicate evidential support, sometimes just to indicate a chronological relationship. This happened and then this happened. Sometimes we'll just string together two claims using a because that just expresses chronological sequence, right? Sometimes the because indicates both a chronological sequence and a causal relationship, and that causal relationship, right? I slammed on my brakes and then I hit the other car, right? Or I did this because that happened, right? Sometimes that reaction thing, that's not a logical thing. It's just a claim about the order things happened in time. So in that case, not every because indicates a logical relationship. So again, you got to check in with me to make sure that you kind of have the right feel for how these things go, right? And that the answers to those kind of questions belong in the box below the box you're asking that question of. All right, There's other things that we can talk about here when we're talking about kind of either creating more boxes or building out our map, right? Lots of times, at least initially, the tendency is to pack too much into every box. I've had maps where students have put in kind of literal paragraphs, 2, 3 sentences, or big, long, complex sentences all in one box, and it looks like just a little wall of text in the box. That should not happen, right? Break things up, because usually those complicated sentences, if they can't be expressed any simpler, what that means is there's a lot going on in that sentence. And claims usually can be expressed really simply. So if you have a sentence that you're like, well, I can't shorten this, then the answer probably is you should be able to break it up and put it into separate boxes, complete sentences, that we can then arrange to make logical sense, because there's probably logical relationships between parts of that sentence because there's more than one claim happening in there, right? The other thing that we're going to be looking at is objections. In our listicles, there were no objections, but in complex real-life arguments about tricky and controversial subjects, there should be objections. The essays that you write, typically, you don't have objections in them. That's a big flaw. We'll be working on that. When you're looking at real-life arguments in editorials or arguments over the table and stuff like that, there's lots of objections out there. We have to include those, if present, in our map so that we have a good picture of what the entire argument is. Because our arguments, remember, when we're mapping out, we're arguing for understanding, not for persuasion or winning, like say a lawyer would, right? So we want to have those objections in there so we're conscious of them so that we can accurately weigh the overall cogency of our argument. The other weird thing that I'll be talking about in 4C is this idea of co-premises. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But for that first thing, splitting up claims, right? We do want to realize these what we call indicator words or connector words, right? And mentioned it before, often, but not always, indicates two claims that belong in separate boxes besides each other. That is, the and connects two claims, but they're both independent reasons for some other claim in the argument. When we have words like but or however, that indicates opposition to the thing that came before it, right? So that often indicates a red box, an objection box, or could be that the but or the however happens after the presentation of an objection to the argument, and then that means it's a rebuttal box, and so you would hang a second red box, which Rationale Online will turn to orange as a rebuttal box. Because, since, so, therefore, those are other really kind of popular words that we use, at least in English, to indicate logical relationships between the things, the claim that happens before the word and the claim that happens after the word, right? And some of these are going to say that the first half of the sentence belongs in the box above, and some of them are going to say the first half of the sentence belongs below the word, but below the word here. And, oh, okay, so, but in general, when you should split a box is that the answer to that is simple, but it's hard to kind of sometimes see in practice. You should split a box when it has two or more claims in it, when it's saying more than one thing, right? So I have these indicator words here, right? So if you have a box, a sentence expressed like this, then what that means is we're going to take the because out, we're going to use it as a clue, X because Y. That is, Y is support for X. Y is at least intended, alleged, to be a supporting reason for X. So it's going to look like this. Sometimes, though, we will put the conclusion after the reason with so or therefore, so the Y belongs above the X. So here are some examples. I've numbered them here because the arguments that I plucked them out of with the auto numbering with the some of these are identical, so that can be confusing. So in the comments, see if you can tell me how you would break these up, because each one of these has more than one claim in it. So use the number here to refer to which one and try it out. Just try one and leave the other ones for other people who come later, right? And or critique other people's guesses and see if you think that they ought to be split up in a different way, or if you think that somebody has put them upside down. All right. This other big thing that we need when we're building out boxes, either when we're analyzing somebody else's argument, often, but not always, they'll include objections. Including objections, great thing. You want to have objections, because if you don't have objections in your argument, if all you can think of when you're thinking about that conclusion that you want to persuade somebody of is just positive reasons to believe that thing, and you can't think of what the other side might say, then you're not thinking clearly about the subject, or this is not as controversial a topic as you thought it was, right? Real arguments, controversial topics, are going to have at least two sides to them, which means a good argument analysis should have some red boxes in it. All right. Objections, when we state them, they are going to need, at the tips of the argument, they're going to need basis boxes, just like our green supporting claim boxes. If they are the tip of a map, often when we have objections, they are not going to be the tips. That is, there's going to be more that's said, logically speaking, after that objection is stated, right? But objections are simply reasons not to believe the box above, right? So remember, we had those questions that I said you should ask to try and figure out whether boxes belong one way, one above the other, or the opposite, right? You ask, hey, if this was true, would that help me believe this other claim? If the answer is yes, then it belongs below it. Well, objections are simply that they just work opposite to that. They're reasons not to believe the box that they are placed under is true, right? So you ask, if this was true, if this objection was true, would it tend to make me think the box above it is false? Would it make me more skeptical? Would it tend to make me believe the box above it less if I believed the objection box? The answer is yes, then it belongs in the right place there, and you found the right location for it in your map, right? Most objections are gonna themselves have green supporting boxes underneath them. That is, some of you are gonna have to adjust your kind of thinking, because it sounds maybe a little bit counterintuitive that it's against that when you have an objection, a red box, that everything underneath it that supports the objection should also be red. No. The green boxes support the thing directly above them. So you're going to have, if you have an objection in a red box, you're going to have green boxes underneath it that support the objection, that help make the objection claim more believable. All right. They might also, those objection boxes might also have objections to the objection, that is, rebuttals or replies, right? So often somebody will have an argument, they'll say, I'm trying to convince you of this thing. Some other person might say, that thing is not real, not true, don't believe it for this reason. That's the objection. And then if I want to convince you that you ought to believe that thing, I'm going to have to reply or respond to that objection to defuse it, or to compensate for it or something like that. So often I'll have arguments why you shouldn't believe, reasons why you shouldn't believe the objection, and those are going to be red boxes placed under that red box. In Rationale Online, when you place a red box directly under another red box, it's going to turn it orange to kind of indicate that. All right, the last kind of complicated thing that you probably will find in your more real life argument is a co-premise relationship. Okay, so sometimes we're going to have statements or claims that are not independently supporting another claim above them in the map. That is, we're going to have, sometimes there are claims that have to work together, so you'll have multiple claims working together to make a single reason. Okay, and so I have some examples here, right? So sorry if this is depressing, but the conclusion is I'll fail the exam because if I don't read the readings and review the lecture notes, I'll fail the exam, and I didn't read the readings or review the lecture notes. If all I had was this, that doesn't support the conclusion that I will fail the exam, because it's a speculative if statement, right? If all I had was this, I didn't read the readings or review the lecture notes, maybe that would be weak support for failing the exam, right? But it's when these two claims are together and they work together that you're going to have strong support for failing the exam, right? So those two claims actually have to work together. They form one single reason that supports this claim up here, right? You can see I have another example over here. If you can, in the comments, try and articulate why this reason right here belongs on its own and why these two right here have to team up to form a supporting reason for this conclusion. All right. I have some other examples here for you, right? And so this one here, I've mapped the same stuff in the two different ways, right? Just so you can see that it works better when they are arranged as co-premises in the same green box. Incidentally, this is why we use the advanced reasoning format in Rationale Online, because the regular reasoning format doesn't let you do co-premises, but so we need to have this room. And the simple thing to do in Rationale Online to change something from this into this is you click on the white box inside here, you rip it out and you plunk it in here, and you'll see that there will be that purple line will show up inside the green box, telling you that if you drop it there, then it will go beside that guy, and then they pop together in here like that, right? Once you do this sort of thing, right, each white box, when you're ready to do ARG evaluations, each white box inside the green here needs its own A basis box, or you can attach other supporting reasons directly to this box, directly to that box, or collectively to the whole box by hovering it over here, and then the link comes up here, or it comes right here, or it comes right here. But if they don't have supporting reasons, then they need their own A basis boxes, but the green box gets one R evaluation. That is, not every white box inside the green should get its own R note. Only the green box as a whole should get its R note when you're ready to do R evaluation on co-premises. That was a lot. So you might find yourself revisiting this video as you're trying to build down your map. That's cool, that's great, but remember, the key thing is don't do a lot of work before checking in and giving me a submission to take a look at and give you some feedback on. If you spend 2 hours wrestling with a map and you put down a dozen boxes and you got them all worked out and stuff like that, that's probably too much. Unless you're really lucky or good, right? It's kind of likely that I'm going to be unhappy with how you've placed something, and that might invalidate half of the work that you did, which will be depressing. So don't do that, okay? Spend 30 minutes-ish or so trying to build out your map, get 4 or 5 boxes arranged, submit that. Get the green light from me, get some tips from me, and then use that to revise or fix what you've got, and then build out a little bit more, and then hand that in. Okay, these little kind of baby steps like that will ensure that you are being efficient with your work. And if you're kind of impatient, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but maybe I got to wait a half a day or a whole day to get that grading feedback. That's why we have the topics in thinking modules. Do this map first, submit it, and then while you're waiting for me to give you feedback, do some other part of the course, right? Watch some other video, do the readings, that kind of stuff. All right, get to it.